Are we in quorum call?
The Senate is in a quorum call.
I ask consent the quorum call be suspended.
Without objection.
Mr. President, in the past 2 years, we've made historic, steady progress to strengthen the American economy. Under President Biden's leadership, we've successfully navigated one challenge after another, from the COVID pandemic to Putin's invasion of Ukraine to supply chain snarls and persistent inflation. And though America's economy has remained resilient in the face of these challenges, it is not invincible. We received a reminder of that just a few days ago, when financial regulators took swift action to prevent a catastrophe. Over the weekend, federal regulators seized a major bank that was teetering on the brink of collapse, First Republic, and sold it to J.P. Morgan Chase. These actions not only protected First Republic's depositors, they could have saved our economy from potential recession. Why do I say that? Well, First Republic was the third major bank to fail in 2 months. In fact, it was the second largest bank failure since 2008. So think about what could have happened had regulators failed to contain the damage of First Republic's collapse. Today, we would be reading headlines about panicky investors, panicky depositors, and turmoil throughout the financial system. Thankfully, we avoided that outcome. And it's because the government had the good sense to step in and maintain confidence in the banking system. Now federal regulators stepped in to protect our economy when the crisis at hand was a bank with $229 billion in assets. But that $229 billion bank asset pales in comparison to a much larger undertaking we're facing in Washington today, the future of America's $23 trillion economy. Right now, in the U.S. House of Representatives, Speaker McCarthy is threatening our economy with the first ever federal debt default, the first time ever in our history. And let's put Speaker McCarthy's dangerous gamble in context. Just days ago, some of the smartest financial minds in the world were convinced that a $229 billion bank could mean the difference between financial stability and financial calamity. Well, that's $229 billion is a tiny fraction of the $23 trillion economy that Speaker McCarthy is gambling with. We're only weeks away from the deadline of July 1st. That's when Secretary Yellen says America could default on our federal debt. So every day that the House Republicans refuse to perform the most basic responsibility of government, paying our bills, they are spreading uncertainty throughout the global economy. That uncertainty is dangerous and costly. Over the past few years, our nation has emerged from the depths of a once-in-a-century pandemic. We've navigated one market disruption after another, and today we're finally moving in the right direction. But now Speaker McCarthy in the House wants to throw all of that historic progress away. Why? To please the most radical members of his party. The debt ceiling proposal House Republicans passed last week is not a budget. It is a MAGA manifesto. It is a ransom note to the American people. Either suffer the disastrous consequences of a debt default or face devastating cuts in services and programs that millions of Americans rely on every day. Mr. President, I just left a hearing on the Appropriations Subcommittee on Health and Human Services. Appearing before that committee was the National Institutes of Health. This is the premier medical research agency in the world. Of 500 plus new prescription drugs, they're responsible for almost all of them, the basic research. And just this week, we had an announcement, a dramatic announcement in Chicago. Northwestern University doing medical research, and I'm going to try to state this properly as a liberal arts trained lawyer when I get into medicine and science. But they have finally found a way to successfully breach the blood-brain barrier. What does it mean? We had two of our most famous senators in modern time, Ted Kennedy, John McCain, both pass away because of glioblastoma, brain cancer. You understand that personally more than any other member of this body. And we watched as they went through surgery, which was the only technique that could be used on this brain cancer, in an attempt to remove the tumor and all of the cancer cells. Well, naturally and unfortunately, that process is not as good as it should be. And tumor brain cells remained and ultimately took their lives. Well, now these doctors at Northwestern have found a way to breach this blood-brain barrier so that they can apply chemotherapy drugs to the brain directly. It is dramatic development that could have applications as well when it comes to Parkinson's and Alzheimer's. That was discovered this week because of an NIH grant, a National Institute of Health grant. Millions of dollars to these researchers that could transform the way we treat brain cancer in America as well as Parkinson's and Alzheimer's. So what does Speaker McCarthy want to do with the budget of this agency, the National Institute of Health? He wants to cut it by 20 to 25%. That is an outrage to think that we would forestall the research which could save lives and alleviate suffering across America. The fact that our leadership in the world in medical research would be jeopardized because of gamesmanship by Speaker McCarthy on the issue of the debt ceiling. His proposal for a budget, if you want to call it that, is a MAGA manifesto. They don't care. They're determined to preserve the Trump tax cuts at any expense. And when you look at cutting 20 to 25% of medical research, it's true that they will go to an extreme. What would debt default look like? Well, it would wipe out also trillions of dollars in savings by families across America, and the 401ks would take a beating. It would kill millions of jobs and force businesses to grind to a halt, and it would send our economy into a recession. Does Speaker McCarthy believe that any of us were sent to Washington to achieve that goal? Defaulting would send interest rates soaring, making costs like credit cards and mortgages even more expensive. It's a non-starter, but so is accepting any of the destructive cuts which I've described. Their MAGA manifesto would cause needless suffering all across America. It would hurt virtually everybody in this nation except the top 1%, which would have their Trump tax cut preserved. To start, this Republican bill would decimate funding for America's veterans, eliminating 80,000 jobs in the Veterans Health Administration, and threaten housing and food security for them as well. This proposal would also wipe out 30,000 law enforcement and Border Patrol jobs. Next week, we've got a watershed event occurring on the border. I'm sure you're aware of it as the presiding officer represents the state of New Mexico. The question is what's going to happen when we eliminate Title 42? Are we going to have an onslaught of thousands of people seeking asylum in this country, and are we ready for them? I have heard many members of the Senate from the other side of the aisle suggest they're unhappy with the situation. I am too, but we need to respond to it and respond to it in an orderly, direct fashion. Defunding Border Patrol agents is a ridiculous outcome, and to think that Speaker McCarthy would defund Border Patrol agents in this country at this moment in history is just not sensical at all, nonsensical. I would just say that when it comes to the defunding of police and border control agents, it's a bad idea, even if it comes from a Republican speaker. And if this proposal became law, I might add the proposal by McCarthy for his budget. We would also cut 1 million senior citizens of Meals on Wheels. What does this program do? For many of our elderly citizens, particularly those who are in a compromised medical state, this is the only contact, the social contact they have each day, perhaps with the mailman as well. That's it. And to eliminate this Meals on Wheels in order to preserve the tax cut by the Trump administration is just unfair. Let me tell you what the cuts would mean in my state of Illinois. The Republican proposal would force 13,000 children in our state to lose child care and preschool. It would strip food assistance from 55,000 women, infants, and children. Does that make any sense at all? And it would threaten medical care for more than 186,000 veterans in Illinois. 50,000 seniors would lose their Meals on Wheels in my state. Yesterday, my office heard from the Greater Chicago Food Depository, a food bank that's one of the best that provides meals to seniors and families. Here's what one of their staff members said, and I quote, "These proposed cuts are coming at a time when the need we're seeing in the community is as high as it was during the beginning days of COVID. Families are really struggling." These are the families that Speaker McCarthy would abandon with his manifesto. And for what purpose is he doing this? I'll tell you. To keep tax cuts for the wealthiest people and the most profitable corporations in place. Another windfall for the well-off. We can and we should debate our spending practices for the year to come. But this is not it. This is not the place to do it. And this is not the time to do it with the debt ceiling looming. Right now we have one responsibility. Maintain the reputation of the United States of America for having full faith and credit, standing behind our debts and making our payments. That is our constitutional duty. The path forward is clear. We need a clean bill for the debt ceiling, and then we can debate the issue of the budget and appropriations. I yield.